Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Eric Bassier. I'm head of solution marketing here at Hammerspace. And today I'm joined by Matt Fornito. We're going to be talking about the state of AI in 2024. We're going to be talking about top barriers to AI success and how enterprises and organizations can overcome some of those hurdles to be successful. So before we begin getting into the conversation, Matt, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And would you mind just introduce yourself really quickly? Tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Eric, for having me. I really appreciate this. Yeah, I guess to get to who I am and where I am, it's important to go back a little ways, right? So I had been in grad school in organizational psychology, focused a lot on like leadership's team training, change management. And then really didn't touch it after I left. I was recruited out as a data scientist by Sports Authority, trying to save them, and realized that they had the consulting firm that had come in prior to me joining had done customer segmentation wrong, and they had been targeting things wrong for 7 years. And after that, I went to Dish Network, was responsible for some really cool projects, including like $15 billion of spend for the FCC Spectrum auction for the CEO. And then I ended up like starting my own data science consulting firm back in 2015. And I was fortunate enough that my firm was brought on as one of 7 consulting partners worldwide for NVIDIA. And so got to do some really interesting and great projects there. And then ultimately had joined, based on at NVIDIA's request, the joining like the VAR solution integrator side, right? Of like, what does this ecosystem look like in regards to AI, not just in regards to a data science use case and building a model, but what is the hardware and infrastructure that's needed for AI products to be successful? What does that software stack look like? And where are companies struggling today? And so did that for about 7 years at Computer Center and Trace 3. We were number 1 and number 3 globally in NVIDIA sales and top 5 with the majority of OEMs and AI SaaS companies you can think of, and won NVIDIA's Partner of the Year award. So what I had really realized, which kind of came back to my background in psychology, was that we need to not just look at this as like a computational efficiency problem, right, and a performance problem, but what are we actually trying to help customers solve? And I got to work with the majority of Fortune 500 senior leaders. And it wasn't just about like, let's just solve one use case or let's just build the infrastructure. But it's like, what are you trying to be as a data-driven company? How are you looking to leverage AI, not just for one use case, but for a multitude of cases? And that led into me ultimately leaving the seller space for a little bit and taking a chief data officer job at Revenue IO, which is backed by Goldman Sachs, and got to build up a large language model infrastructure for AI sales training where leaders could coach their reps better by being able to use large language models to dissect what people are doing really well or poorly, and reps could do that for themselves. But also like looking at the customer life cycle, it's what did customers actually need? What were their pain points? What are the next next action items that should be taken to help them be successful in their journey? And so now the past year, I've actually spent building up a fractional and advisory chief data analytics officer and chief AI officer practice. So have former CEOs of Meta, Intel, GlaxoSmithKline, Novartis, Equifax, and a number of others. And what we really look to do is we've seen these pain points for nearly 2 decades now, right? I built my first data science models back in 2003. So been in the space for a good while. And as I've seen models continuously fail and initiatives fail, the question to me had been why? Because technology had gotten so much better, and it's so exciting of where we are today. And so part of this had to do with like, I see leaders not necessarily trusting data, not necessarily trusting AI, depending on their maturity, right? And if they're at that point, then how do we help them accelerate their journey? How do we build trust and credibility? How do we help them figure out where do we leverage AI? What is the ROI associated with this to create value? What is the strategy? And then what does the ecosystem need to look like so that you can be a data-driven company, you can be an AI-empowered organization, so that all of your folks at the organization can use large language models, and the data scientists can build really cool models that help accelerate the journey for the company. And so that's where my passion is. It's in the intersection of AI and humanity, and empowering organizations to really improve the customer experience, but also empowering employees to be the best selves at work.
I like it. Yeah, you've had a lot of experience in AI, and as we've gotten to know each other a little bit, I was surprised how far back, some of the even the models that you worked on, how far back that goes. Hammerspace as a company, I mean, we offer a data platform for distributed unstructured data, and we work with a lot of enterprise organizations. We're used in infrastructure for AI training and some inferencing in that. You talked about a lot of your work with Fortune 500 in that, and especially in the last 2 years, there's been a big change and a lot of interest in enterprise AI. So what have you seen kind of in those dynamics in the last couple of years with enterprise AI? What have you seen change? What are some of the just big trends that you're seeing out there today?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to take a step back and look at like what are organizations trying to accomplish and how mature are they? Because if we look at, let's just say, mid-sized to really large organizations, they've been around for decades, so they have tons and tons and tons of data. But if you ask them, like, how many of you have built models that went into production, and have you seen an ROI around that? Those numbers are sparse. If you look at like Deloitte and McKinsey reports, right, the ROI around for the majority of organizations that you might see like 25 to 50% of the leaders accelerating their journey, but everyone else is really struggling still. And the question is why? Because back in, let's say, a decade ago, much less 2 decades ago, we did not have performant architecture, right? NVIDIA's like AI GPUs came out around 2015. We did not have ecosystems that could leverage and access all of the data, right? In regards to the computation, the network switches, the storage, like we could not get the right data together to build comprehensive models. We had to like sample just a small amount of data and hope it represented the entire population of the customer base or whatever we're trying to solve for. And so like, and also when you look at AI, I mean, the reality is that these machine learning models have existed since 1950s, right? The deep learning has had 2 essentially nuclear winters where finally after 2015, we've continued to see this acceleration. And when NVIDIA released them, everyone got really, really excited about AI back in 2015 and said, oh, okay, AI is the future. We need AI. And NVIDIA was empowering organizations. They do have like rapids for structured data, machine learning types, but it was really around empowerment around like text and images and video. So when we talk about looking at MRI images for doctors or self-driving cars, that's where the majority of ROI was seen around NVIDIA's GPUs. And the majority of organizations were not necessarily mature enough to necessitate leveraging those at the time. But then the really, really cool thing happened of OpenAI releasing GPT-3.5 in November of 2022. And all of a sudden, you didn't just have like data scientists and data engineers evangelizing what's really cool about AI. You had everyone being able, like with a user interface, being able to experience AI firsthand and being able to ask questions, being able to do things that were innovative, right? And whether that was, some of the more what are perceived as mundane things today of, oh, write this email for me, or write an email campaign, or write a blog post. We're getting to this aspect now of like, hey, I would like a second brain. I want to build a strategy for the next 12 months, right? Like, can you help me do that? And the fact that we're accelerating that journey means that we're not just seeing the understanding and comprehension and insights and interest from the CIO, the CTO, the CDO side, but we're seeing it from the entire business side of the house because they're starting to understand how this can help them do their jobs more effectively, how they can be more performant, how they can spend more time on meaningful things. And so when we talk about the shift, it used to be, yep, we have data scientists, we have data, we have structured data, we have machine learning, we'll build some models, we'll put it into production, and maybe people will trust and leverage it, right? And if we look historically, it's kind of the thing, right? If I could build 100% accurate customer churn model and know everything in regards to why, all the levers in regards to why customers are churning, but I haven't talked with sales, I haven't talked with marketing, I haven't talked with product, and no one actually changes their behavior, And guess what happens? We see the exact same amount of churn. And so back then, it was a bit of a frustrating experience as a data scientist because we weren't seeing that success. But then now we're seeing this transition to, okay, we have technology and infrastructure and AutoML platforms and everything else that can help accelerate the structured data building. We still have the companies that are using image data for like autonomous vehicles and whatnot that are continuing to accelerate that journey to get to level 5 self-driving or to make hospitals more effective and the doctors more effective. But we're also seeing this large language model and generative AI advent. And that's really the hugest impact that we're going to see over the next decade, because there is so much unstructured data in the world. About 90% of the world's data is unstructured. And so being able to leverage that for insights, whether that's what we call RAG, that retrieval augmented generation for customer support agents or documentation lookups or whatever needs to be done, or more of like what we'll accelerate towards with AI digital twins and AI virtual assistants, the Pandora's box is open. And so we're at this really exciting inflection point where it's how do we help companies mature? How do we help them understand the greatest opportunities for ROI as well as return on employee and like time impact? And then how do we ensure that they have the right infrastructure, the right technologies in place to accelerate their own journey?
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk about infrastructure a little more in a minute. And just worth mentioning to our audience, I think most people know this, but just something Matt and I have been talking about. You said, about 90% of all data being generated today is unstructured data. I think of that as it's files and objects. Structured data is it's rows and columns in a database. I think there's a pretty well-established market for, building these data lakes of structured data that can then be used for machine learning. We're talking more, and we're certainly where Hammerspace focuses, it's more about that unstructured data for some of these other use cases. And you had mentioned something to me that I thought was interesting too, leading up to this. Anywhere from 50 to 90% of AI initiatives fail in the enterprise, which I thought was sort of a surprising. Give us your take on why is that, and what are the things that enterprises should be thinking about to avoid that?
Yeah. So if we look historically, and it certainly happens for some companies today, but if we look historically at companies that were trying to make AI successful a decade ago, right? 2011, 2014-ish range. The issues were that you could not get all of the data that was necessary to build models. You could not, you didn't have the technology infrastructure to be able to handle that. You didn't have the computational life cycle to be able to actually even like build these complex models. And so like you were maybe subsampling data, you were, doing what you could. And then there weren't the software technologies to build those models, much less hand off those models and scale them for production. So back then it used to be a data scientist has to like manually aggregate all of this data from all these disparate sources and get access to it. And probably takes weeks or months because they're not the gatekeepers in regards to these different data repositories. And this was, certainly the structured data side. And then after they build a model, it would pass off to a data engineer who has to like recode and refactor and like be able to make sure that it can scale into production. And so you saw like these technology, whether it was infrastructure, whether it was software, whether it was the handoff between the technologists, all of these were the gaps for organizations back then. And I know that's certainly true for organizations that were, we'll say, hyper immature back then in the AI space. That's what they're struggling with today. For the ones who were at the forefront of AI and helping drive that, they've now realized, oh, these are these great AutoML tools. There's highly performant network switches. There's NVIDIA GPUs for computational parallel processing acceleration. The technology is there. And so the question then becomes, why in the world are we still seeing 50 to 90% of initiatives fail? And it's, if you look at data folks, if you look at technologists, like, if you went into a room and asked 100 of them, like, when's the last time any of you were on a customer call, you're going to hear crickets, right? Like, they don't necessarily talk with sales, with marketing, with customers, with all of these different functional groups that are looking to accelerate ROI and vision. And so the issue is that you don't have the buy-in, you don't have the evangelists for that. You might not even have the executive leadership team that like trusts data or understands AI. And who's going to buy something that they don't trust or understand? Who's going to leverage it if they don't know what is the greatest opportunity for return on investment? Like, where do I invest $1 so that it becomes $5, $10, $25, not that dollar cost me $1, right? And even more so because other people are working on whatever that dollar costs to implement. So right. the shift that we're seeing now, and it's the reason I started this company, is like that people process, understanding, buy-in, change management, alignment, and vision, right? Because if the organization has a strategy of who they want to be, they have a vision of where they want to go, they have alignment on what's going to move the needle, and the ideation of what use cases are really going to drive that, then all they have to make sure is that they have the right people in place to build, they have the right data to be able to build, and they have the right technologies to leverage for that ecosystem. And so that's where we're seeing today is that you have the old historic companies that are just 10 years behind, and they're struggling with a lot of the technological aspects. And then you have the other companies that are needing to drive change and innovation and alignment because they've been tactical for the past 10 years trying to figure AI out to be more effective. So now they need to focus more strategically first, and then figure out the tactical implementation and the infrastructure that'll really support the initiatives and goals they have over the next 1 to 3 years.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And one thing I wanted to bring up here today as part of our conversation, NVIDIA had done, they did some research to their customer base at the start of this year, and they asked their customers across a number of different industries a set of surveys, kind of trying to get the state of AI in 2024. And some of the things that came out of those surveys were three kind of common themes that surfaced in terms of just barriers to AI success. And let's kind of segue into that a little bit. So the first was that their customers said their data was siloed. It was siloed in disparate locations, I think was the actual kind of feedback point or the customer language there, meaning, in our world, we think of that as this unstructured data, these files and objects. It's in a NAS system. It's in maybe more than one type of NAS system that's, been around for a long time. Maybe it's in a cloud repository stored in object format. And these are in different locations around the world. Most of our customers are geographically distributed in some way. So you've got all this siloed data, makes it really difficult to assemble or consolidate a data set, whether it's for training purposes or RAG or something else. The second was just infrastructure challenges, more specifically. And again, this was kind of the phrasing from the survey, how to reduce latency, right? How to take latency out of their infrastructure, so speed up the infrastructure to feed these NVIDIA GPUs. And also just practically looking at ways to reduce cost and complexity to address things like power and cooling. It's not it's not like this exciting thing, but it's a real kind of constraint that I think a lot of enterprises have. And then lastly, I thought this one was interesting, where not phrased as a barrier exactly, but this reality that the NVIDIA customers came back and said about 49% of those customers will be plan to run AI projects both in the cloud and on premises by next year. So this idea of the GPU resources not being co-located with the data, and the need to mobilize that data to be able to get it to the GPU resources when we need it. You and I had we were talking about this earlier, where, companies that are at that point where they're looking at investing in, maybe a larger GPU infrastructure, it can be a very big capital investment. And this idea of, well, maybe I start in the cloud, and I start training some data or doing some initiative in the cloud, and then the ability to move it back and forth. So those were kind of three of the barriers that were feedback points from this NVIDIA survey. I'm curious just to get your perspective on that and expand on it a little bit, and kind of how do you see organizations overcoming those hurdles, just both from, maybe those that are not quite as mature and maybe those that are further along in their AI journey?
Perfect. So definitely a loaded question. A lot to dissect there. So simplifying it. Let's just say that there's immature, which can be a range of customers, and then we'll say mature, hyper mature. The reality of the landscape is maybe it's 5 to 10, might even be less, percent of customers worldwide are really mature around data and AI, right? They have a data roadmap and strategy, AI roadmap and strategy, know what they're trying to execute against, know the pain points that they have from a data and an infrastructure perspective. That means that a lot of organizations, I'll say 90, 95%, are really struggling there, right? And the rationale is certainly those pieces you mentioned in regards to like, let's say, data silos. Now it applies to both. For the immature customers, it's all of our data siloed. So like, how do we get, let's say, data scientists access to all of these different data repositories or data lakes, data lighthouses, whatever the heck it is, to build what they need to build, whether it's structured data machine learning, whether that's generative AI. So that's really, really problematic, right? That they don't have an easy button to do that. And so it's a very, very manual lift to give people access. And then they have to figure out, well, where the heck are we going to aggregate all that data and store that data so that we can leverage it? And then we have to go through that computational life cycle you mentioned of like data not being co-located near GPUs. And so you can overload the network switches. And so other people can't do the things that they need to do on that. If it's really large data, like you can only put the amount of data into the GPU's memory and it gets written back, like back and forth over and over again until the model's fully built. And so like very time consuming, can choke out storage, can choke out networking. So that's really, really problematic for those organizations. It's part of the reason why I love Hammerspace so much, because if you say, well, we can sit on top of all that and access all the data anywhere and bring that together so that you don't have to like try to get access to all these disparate technological systems. You don't have to go to 5 different folks in IT and wait weeks and weeks for access to that. We now have more proximity to the GPUs to build these models faster. We're not choking out storage and networking. Like all of that's hyper valuable, right, for these immature customers. But you can also look at the maturity side of that, is that, you know, the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, they know they have siloed data. You have like companies that have existed for decades and they have old stuff on Teradata and Netezza and maybe even like mainframe, but then they went to like an OEM like Dell or HP, and then they went to GCP, and then they had a CTO come in and shift it to Azure, and then they rolled back to on-prem. So the data's everywhere. And the reality is, like, if you actually talked about value creation, the real reality, which will never, ever happen, except for maybe like one company in 10,000, is you should architect from scratch what you're trying to solve the next 3 to 5 years and build the infrastructure for that, and collect the right data for solving those problems, right? And ignore that you have data in like 15 different locations. But nobody's going to do that, right? It's like, it's too much lift. And we have this sunk cost fallacy of like, we're throwing away 20 years of data. And it doesn't matter that like that data might not be relevant anymore. The perspective is like, oh shit, we wasted 20 years of like changing infrastructure over and over again. We wasted 20 years of paying storage costs if it's like in the cloud. Like, what was this all for? So nobody's going to do that. So the reality is, it's like, we want to make sure we leverage all of our data. And so they either have to shift everything from all these legacy infrastructures and re-architect it for whatever they have now, or they can use something like Hammerspace that sits on top, like for that, right? They know what their pain points are. They know where the issues are in regards to access, in regards to connectivity, in regards to performance for these mature companies. And so they understand like explicitly what the pain points are, and they're looking for solutions that can solve that. Or they might not even know that those solutions exist. But that's where organizations need to shift towards, is how do we get all of our data together that we're going to need to build something, whether that's, you know, the machine learning side, whether that's the Gen AI side or computer vision, deep learning side. How do we reduce costs? Because we don't want to just continuously keep buying more storage and trying to figure out what ecosystem is the right one that we should have today. And then how do we make sure that like this is performant, whether that means spinning up and spinning down GPUs in the cloud, whether it means like you have GPUs all over the globe, like being able to essentially access all of them as one system so that you don't just have a data scientist provisioning one GPU in one location and the other 400 GPUs are sitting idle. Like, screw that. Like, we should have this where that data scientist can go, okay, until somebody else needs GPUs, I'm going to use all 400 of these, and I'm going to get a model built exponentially faster than it would have taken me before.
Cool. Well, I like it a lot. Well said. Matt, this was great. Thank you very much. I think for our audience, we just to build on something Matt said there, Hammerspace is a data platform. It's a data platform built for distributed file and object data. It's built for this unstructured data that lives everywhere in the cloud, on-prem, on multiple storage systems. And the way that we're helping our customers is, one, enabling them to consolidate all of that unstructured data onto a single platform. And technically, it is a single global namespace that can span sites, cloud, multiple storage systems. Within that namespace, Hammerspace data orchestration services can automate the flow of data within that namespace across sites, clouds, and storage, so we can bring the data to the compute resources that need it. And lastly, Hammerspace is built on a standards-based parallel file system architecture that delivers that high throughput, low latency performance to feed GPUs. Think about that as the data orchestration services are kind of the long haul. It's about getting data from one data center to another. This standards-based parallel file system architecture is that last mile delivery, right? Being able to feed GPU clusters in the cloud really quickly. This was great, Matt. Thank you very much. For those, if you want to learn more about Hammerspace, make sure to check us out on our website, hammerspace.com. Matt, for you, if people want to get in touch with you and just learn more about what you do or engage with you, where should our audience go?
Yeah,
how should they reach out to you?
Yeah, it's two things, right? One is if you want more information on our fractional advisory and executive workshops, you can go to our website. It's theaiag.com for AI Advisor Group, theaiag.com. And otherwise, I'm Matt Fornito, so LinkedIn/in at Matt Fornito. If you want to reach out directly, have questions, please feel free. I love talking with people on there. Love posting content that's relevant to business leaders and technological leaders to really help drive innovation.
Excellent. Matt, thank you very much. And for everyone else, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Eric.